I'm Sandra.
As I sat in the cozy corner of my new riverside apartment, sipping on a glass of red wine, I couldn't help but reflect on the stormy past that had led me to this peaceful moment. The divorce papers were already signed, and the nightmare with my ex-husband, Victor, was finally over. But the journey to get here was filled with betrayal, deception, and ultimately, a triumph of self-discovery. I used to live in Seattle, a city that now held a bittersweet memory for me. From the outside, my marriage to Victor seemed perfect. He was charming, well-spoken, and my parents adored him. My father, a successful businessman who built a multi-million-dollar tech empire from the ground up, saw Victor as the son he never had. My mother, a kind-hearted and gentle woman, always said he was the perfect match for me. Little did I know that behind his handsome facade, Victor had a hidden agenda. After months of working long hours at my law firm, I decided to take a much-needed trip to Hawaii with my three best friends, Lily, Grace, and Mia. We had planned this getaway for 6 months, imagining days of sunbathing on the beach, indulging in delicious local cuisine, and exploring the beautiful waterfalls. However, just 2 days into the trip, Lily had an allergic reaction to a tropical fruit, and Grace got a call about an urgent project at her job. Our spirits were crushed, and I decided to cut the trip short. All I could think about was Victor's face lighting up when I surprised him with his favorite Kona coffee and a box of macadamia nuts. With a smile on my face, I parked in front of our luxurious house in the suburbs. I entered through the garage as usual, hoping to give him a pleasant shock. But instead, I was the one who got the shock of my life. From the second-floor study, I heard Victor's voice, clear as day. Marriage is just a trap. If it weren't for Sandra's family money, I would have left ages ago. I froze on the stairs, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I waited for him to laugh, thinking it was a bad joke. But there was only silence, followed by a cold, heartless laugh. Playing the loving husband is so easy, especially since her dad is about to make me a partner in the company. In a few years, I won't have to fake it anymore, he sneered. I felt like the world had stopped spinning. How could I have been so blind? For 3 years, I had believed in his sweet words and loving gestures. After all those romantic dinners and whispered promises, he saw me as nothing but a money-making machine. Somehow, I managed to stay calm. I quietly grabbed the gifts and left the house without a sound. I drove to an empty parking lot near the airport and sat there, crying for hours until my eyes were swollen and red. When an old woman tapped on my window to ask if I was okay, I forced a smile and lied, saying my pet parrot had just died. The next day, I went back home and greeted Victor with a fake smile. He hugged me tightly, acting like nothing had happened. But from that moment on, I knew I was living with a stranger. I decided to bide my time and expose his true colors. Over the next 5 days, I watched him closely. I pretended to believe his lies while observing his every move. On a Friday morning, I told him I had to work late at the firm, but instead, I went to the bank. There, I found suspicious transactions in our joint account. Victor had been withdrawing small amounts, around $200 or $300 at a time, adding up to almost $20,000 in 6 months. Most of the withdrawals were made in Portland, his hometown. There were no legitimate expenses, just money disappearing into thin air. My gut told me to dig deeper. I remembered his old gym bag that he always took to the gym. Inside, I found a prepaid phone with a password set to his birthday. How predictable. Under the letter C, there was only one number saved. The texts were like daggers to my heart. I miss you. Almost there. Hold on a little longer, Camille. Once I'm a partner, we'll have it all. Sandra has no idea. Camille was a name I had never heard in our 3-year marriage, but clearly, she was more than just a friend to Victor. I took pictures of everything and stored them on an external hard drive in my office safe. I knew it was time to fight back. I secretly opened a personal bank account at a small local bank where Victor had never been. I started transferring money from our joint account into it, little by little, never more than $400 at a time. On the surface, I continued to be the doting wife. But I also left subtle clues. I forgot to pay the utility bill, let him see the credit card was declined, and left open emails about divorce lawyers. I casually mentioned that my father might be restructuring the company's shares due to market uncertainties. Victor started to panic. He checked my phone, snooped through my emails, and suddenly suggested we take a cruise to the Caribbean to rekindle our relationship. I just smiled and nodded, knowing he was testing the waters. Day by day, he became more and more uneasy. He tried to be extra nice, offering to drive me to work, making breakfast, and even cleaning the pool that he had ignored for a year. But his eyes gave him away. They were filled with the fear of losing control. I had all the evidence I needed, and I was ready to play the game on my terms. I started to change my behavior. I stopped sending him loving texts during work, stopped asking what he wanted for dinner, and often locked myself in my office, pretending to be on important calls. Whenever he asked who I was talking to, I gave him vague answers like an old client from New York or a project review. I left my laptop open with searches about asset division and divorce laws in Washington. As I expected, he couldn't resist checking. His actions became more and more blatant. He suggested marriage counseling, something he had laughed at when I brought it up before. He sent me expensive flowers every day with cards full of the top declarations of love. My colleagues would tease me about my romantic husband, but inside, I felt nothing but contempt. One evening, I intentionally left a fake bank statement of my private account on the kitchen counter. When I came back, it was gone. He started to act recklessly. He randomly checked my schedule, showed up unannounced at a meeting I lied about having with Lily at a cafe. The look in his eyes was desperate. I knew the time was right for the final showdown. One Saturday night, I prepared his favorite steak, opened a bottle of his favorite wine, and even put fresh flowers on the table. We sat at the dining table, and he was talking about a new business deal he wanted to propose to my father. When he raised his glass to toast me, I took a deep breath. "Victor, do you remember what you said on our 3-year anniversary? That I was the best thing that ever happened to you?" I asked calmly. He smiled and said, "Of course, I remember. Why do you ask?" I swirled my wine and said, "I think you forgot what you told your friend in the office last week about regretting our marriage and how you would have left if it weren't for my family's money." The glass in his hand froze in mid-air. He tried to play it cool, saying I misheard and that it was just a vent to a friend. But I wasn't going to let him off the hook. "And what about Camille? Were those texts just a part of your venting too?" I asked. His face turned pale. He stammered and then broke down in tears, begging me not to throw away our marriage. He even suggested having a baby to fix things. I laughed coldly. "If you think a baby can keep me tied to you, you're making a big mistake," I said firmly. I stood up, knowing I had won. The next morning, I left the house early and went straight to my private attorney, a tough and experienced woman named Stella that Lily had introduced me to. She didn't need much explanation. The evidence I brought was more than enough. Within a week, Stella and my family's financial team froze all the joint accounts and trusts that Victor had access to. I let him play the perfect husband for a few more days, not letting him suspect a thing. I met with my parents and showed them the evidence. My father was silent, his disappointment evident. My mother cried, but she was also angry. They agreed to support me. 3 days later, Stella filed the divorce papers in court. Victor was served while he was in a meeting with my father, discussing the business deal. The look on his face was a mix of shock, panic, and fury. But I just smiled faintly at him. With all the evidence and my family's support, the divorce was finalized in just 3 weeks. The marriage was declared fraudulent, and most of the prenuptial agreements were nullified in my favor. Victor was left with nothing, not even the luxury sports car I had bought him for his birthday. After the divorce, news spread quickly in Seattle's social circle. Victor lost his image as the perfect son-in-law. His friends distanced themselves from him, and his business partners lost trust in him. I heard that he moved into a small apartment in a less than desirable neighborhood. Not long after, Lily sent me a picture of Victor with a flashy red-haired woman at a seedy bar in Portland. I guess that was Camille. A week later, I received an email from Camille, full of arrogance and defiance, saying that Victor had chosen her. I simply replied, "Good luck, Camille. You'll need it." 2 weeks after the final hearing, I moved out of the house that had never truly been a home. I rented a small apartment by the river. I painted the walls in soft, pastel colors, hung up my favorite paintings, and decorated it exactly the way I wanted. At first, the nights were hard. I didn't cry because I missed Victor, but because I mourned the part of me that had been so naive. However, as time passed, I started to heal. My parents became closer to me. My father would sit with me, sharing stories about his early days in business, and my mother would cook my favorite meals. Lily and I went on trips, tried new hobbies, and attended cultural events. I also received an invitation to speak at a women's financial empowerment conference in San Francisco. I accepted it, not to seek sympathy, but to share my story and let other women know that true freedom comes from within. As I sat there on my balcony, looking at the sunset over the river, I realized that I had come a long way. Victor thought he could use me for my money, but instead, he helped me find the strength to stand on my own. I was no longer the naive woman he once knew. I was Sandra, a woman who had learned to love and protect herself.